Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the bedroom studio. I'm your man in Japan, jcontra, and we're here for a very special Leap Day video. Now, I wanted to do a Q&A video for the month of February, and I've got a lot of questions that you guys want answered, so we're just going to dive right into it. Blocks World Fan asks, how do you open the showcase? All right, so a good simple question up front. So usually, and this is going to be true at Hard Off or pretty much any video game retailer that has usually like a glass showcase full of video games, just go up to the register. Technically the Japanese, I think what I've heard Japanese people is saying is like showcase no ho onegai shimasu, which is like, please take me to the showcase. Just go up and say showcase, please, and they'll know what to do. It's that simple. Also note that if you are getting a game out of the showcase, you can check the contents of what's ever inside the package. I've never had a place tell me, no, I can't. They'll open it up for you. They'll show you the manual. They'll show you the cartridge. They'll show you the condition of the game that you want to buy. So keep that in mind. Next up, Retro Moments asks, does every mandarake have games? I went inside one time in the store here in Nagoya, but didn't find any retro games at all. So I can't speak about Nagoya specifically, although, well, I can like from 7 years ago. When I first came to Japan, Nagoya is actually where I bought my copy of Twilight Princess for the GameCube. And at least when I was there, Nagoya had games. But the thing is that a lot of these stores can change over time. All of the mandarakes I've been to have had games, but like, for example, the one in Shibuya in Tokyo, it has a very, very, very small section. And I don't know if that's management's choice. I don't know if they turn people away when they come to sell video games. There just isn't that ability in the neighborhood. But I mean, yeah, I would maybe sometimes it can just be almost unnoticeable. And so maybe it has games and maybe it doesn't. But at least in my experience, all the ones I've been to have had games ranging from Akihabara, which has a huge, almost half a floor devoted to video games, as opposed to Shibuya, which has just a little section. But Akihabara generally does have games. Next up, Seth asks, do you know where in Sasebo I can buy a PS4 besides the base? So Sasebo is a really interesting case for me. I used to live near Sasebo, about an hour in the south of Japan, and Sasebo also has a naval base. But that's where you'll find American PS4s at the BX on base. Generally, when you're buying a PS4, when you're buying a new console in Japan, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can buy it on Amazon, where it will be at about MSRP. You're not going to save a lot of money that way. You could also buy it at a normal electronics retailer like Yamada Denki, or you could buy it through Yodobashi Camera if you're living in one of the big cities. In Sasebo, because we're talking about like sort of countryside Japan, like anywhere that's not Tokyo, you're going to buy it at your major retailers. If you want to buy a used one, then go to Hard Off and they'll probably have something in good condition that you can find for relatively cheap. You could also try these sort of like there's the manga sokos, which are sort of like just used stuff stores. So it'll be like video games, clothes, like sports accessories. Is just kind of a big like warehouse almost, just full of used stuff. You can find a PS4 there. Next up, Azalea asks, hey jcontra, what do you use for recording videos? I'd like to bring something to record while I'm in Japan and still able to use both hands, maybe a GoPro or something. So in my most recent videos, for about the last year, I've been using an E4K or Yi4K, however you pronounce it. That cost about $150 at the time. I think it's now $100. I use it to shoot. I don't shoot in 4K. I want to say it's like I shoot in 1440 or 2160. I can't remember what the resolution is. It's quite high. And so a 30-minute video is about 10 gigabytes when I shoot it. What I'm shooting on right now is just an iPhone 11 using the front-facing camera, or like the selfie camera that's shooting in 1080p. I have personally been looking at like a a GoPro Hero 7 Black that's about $400 just because it's got great motion smoothing and you can also attach a microphone. The problem with the E4K, and I think the E4K Plus, you can attach a microphone to it, but the one that I use, you just can't. And so the audio quality is just really bad on that. So that's something to consider because it's the cheapest option, especially if you want to do 4K and you want to get that sort of the wide angle, but it's also the cheapest, but the least reliable. The picture quality is fine. A GoPro, I think, would be really cool to have, and that's what I'm looking to do in the future once I can afford it. Next, we have Lord English asks, is GameCube Twilight Princess expensive in Japan? Coincidental. And is it, as it is pretty pricey in North America? No, it's not that. I don't know what the American price is for Twilight Princess, but in Japan, it's sort of one of those medium expensive games. It's not the most expensive game, but it's, I want to say like 40 to 50 bucks. I wouldn't pay more than $60 for Japanese Twilight Princess. Its price has really been kept down because of the Wii release and the HD version that came out for the Wii U. And GameCube really isn't that expensive in Japan. So it's not like America where you've got things like Cubivore that are going to like $200. There isn't a $100 plus game for the GameCube yet here in Japan. So Twilight Princess is going to be relatively cheap. Repent asks, hi jcontra, was wondering, what do you check the prices in stores against for Japanese games? Is Yahoo Auctions a good way to check prices? Thanks. Usually when I check prices, I do two things. For one, if you're in Akihabara, you're always 5 minutes from another game store. So if there's something specifically that I'm looking for, then I will go to one store, check the prices there, and then go to another and then find whichever is the cheapest. Although I'm never really in a rush to buy a game, but that's if you're visiting, and you only have I would just at least visit 2 stores so that you can price compare. In general, if you want to plan ahead for a trip, you can go to the Sudagaya website, just search for Sudagaya and you should be able to find it. I think they just launched an international site, but I haven't really looked into it. I'm more familiar with their Japanese site where you can just search for the game you want. You might have to search for it using the kanji, but just go to like Wikipedia and go to the Japanese Wikipedia for the game you want and search for that on the Sudagaya website. And Sudagaya is sort of like, that's going to be your like mid price, I think. Sometimes it can be low, but again, the condition's going to be really variable, but that's at least a good reference. So again, go to Sudagaya, search for the game you want. That'll at least give you an idea of the ballpark of the price that you should be looking for. Yahoo Auctions is like, it's just so labyrinthine and is so confusing to me that I know I think there might be price checkers out there somewhere, but I've only ever bought one thing on Yahoo Auctions, so I can't really speak to it from experience. Next up, Dernapolis asks, is there a hard off in Tokyo? Now, there's 2 things I need to say about this because, for one, yes, they're actually in the Tokyo metropolitan area as it is officially defined, and as I would say it is broadly defined. There are lots of hard offs that you can access via train that I would really suggest that if you do have some time in Japan, I would say you should go out to them. It's just going to mean that you're going to be taking trains and that's going to be a little bit more pricey, and it's also going to cost you more time. If we're talking about central Tokyo, like something that is easily accessible on, say, the Yamanote line or one of the subways, yes-ish. I think one just opened up in Ueno, which is you could probably walk to it from Akihabara, it'd be maybe like a 30-minute walk. Or there are some in sort of the more residential areas of Tokyo that might take you 30 minutes by train instead of the hour to get to like the boonies of Tokyo. But yes, there are hard offs. There is a hard off in Akihabara, but I don't think it has that many video game things, so I can't really recommend visiting it. But yeah, there are lots of hard offs in Tokyo, and again, you're just going to have to spend a little bit of time to head out of the city center. And the prices will be, I think, generally better at those hard offs, but again, it's not going to be as good as like what I used to get when I lived on Kyushu. Next, Martend Boss asks, "Hi, I noticed watching your videos that you never talked about the PS Vita. Do you have a reason for that?" As for the Vita, I don't know. That's a little bit of a personally complicated question that I don't really want to get into, but needless to say, I don't have a Vita. I just haven't gotten around to it because I haven't really seen any games that appeal to me, although I know someone who will think quite the opposite. But it's just like I've been mostly focusing on like arcade games, arcade shooters. I don't have the time to play RPGs. I haven't really. There's maybe been a couple of games for the Vita that I'm interested in, but now the Vita's actually relatively cheapish at about $100 for something complete in box, going up to like $150 for a special edition, depending on the color. I just again I'm playing DS games, I'm playing Switch games. I just haven't gotten around to the Vita, so I don't know that much about it. Next up, Bargadil asks, and my apologies if I'm pronouncing your internet handle wrong. "One of the first things I noticed in Tokyo on my last trip was how high original DMG Game Boys were." So I think he's referring to, that sort of the off-white, or very first fat Game Boy. "I was on the lookout for a Game Boy Light." So the Game Boy Light, I should mention, is a Japan exclusive. I don't know if it's a Game Boy Pocket sized or if it's a regular Game Boy sized, but it's basically a Game Boy that has a built-in light, a screen light within it. And I think it's like, man, even a loose one goes for like $200, $300 now, so they're very expensive. Sorry. "I was on the lookout for a Game Boy Light and virtually no stores that I went into had one. When I'm looking at listings on eBay, I'm noticing a lot of issues with screens having black marks on them. So I'm afraid to buy a Game Boy Light. Can you offer me any advice?" I do not personally own a Game Boy Light, but I can back you up in saying they are very hard to find. Portable prices have really skyrocketed in the last, I want to say, 2 to 3 years, ranging from just Game Boy consoles to the Game Boy Advance, particularly the SPs. The reason behind this is because these were portable consoles, so they got really roughed up. So really those high-end ones that are in really good condition will fetch very high prices. And the Game Boy Light, because of how unique it is, because it was only ever made in Japan, you have that dual pressure of the domestic market looking for it, as well as the foreign market, those high-end collectors who want the original Game Boy experience, but also want it at that next level where it is Nintendo-made hardware with a Nintendo backlight, meaning it's the best possible experience for original Game Boy games. And I couldn't tell you the last time I saw one. It's been maybe a year or two since I saw it. The black marks on the screen, if you're referring to how there's like this almost like there's a circle in the middle of a screen that's dark, I've heard that's because there's some kind of polarizer that goes underneath the screen. I think basically all like LCDs have this, that it's something that you can replace. It's going to cost you a little bit of money. You maybe could do it yourself if you had a little technical expertise, but I'm sure someone out there would be able to do it for you. So just because it has a big black mark in the center of the screen, that should be fixable, I believe. I have a Game Boy Pocket that has the same issue. I just haven't gotten around to fixing it. And that's something I might try and do myself, or maybe I'll outsource it. I don't know, but it is fixable. Next up, Vita Reborn asks, "I mainly am focusing on collecting every Pokemon game available, including those for the GameCube and the NES," or I don't know what that means. Sorry if I miscopied your question. "Do you see prices for these games and their respective systems possibly going higher in price?" So if we're talking about, all right, let's talk about the two different options. If we're talking about Pokemon games, if we're talking about main series games, so we're talking about the games for the portable consoles, the first Gen 1 and Gen 2 and Gen 3. So yeah, all right, let me even step back a bit. Gen 1 and 2 experienced their highest price increases during the Pokemon Go boom. Pokemon Red and Blue and Green, Gold and Silver, they've leveled out. They've even gone down in price to where I wouldn't pay more than $30 complete in box for Japanese copies of those games. I was actually just in Akihabara yesterday, and I found copies of Pokemon Emerald for $90. That is absolutely insane. I bought a copy of Emerald like maybe 6 months ago for like $50, and that actually was maybe a little bit high. So the Game Boy Advance just in general is out of control. So I really wouldn't look at buying those games right now. Just wait a year or two, and they'll probably go back down to their sort of like, normal price. The Diamond, Pearl, Platinum games, basically the DS games, including Black and White, they're going up a little bit, but they're still probably at the lowest price you're going to find. Black and White 2 are still, I think, like $20 or $30. Those will never significantly go up in price, I think. Maybe in a couple of years there might be a bump, but because there's so many of them got printed, and because you don't have to worry about save batteries on those really, so I don't really see anything happening to those. If you're talking about console games, if you're talking about like, the Pokemon, not the mystery dungeons, but like the Pokemon stadiums, the Pokemon battle coliseums, those games don't really seem to be in high demand, so I don't see the prices for those going anywhere, and they're not particularly rare, so I don't see them ever going above $20 to $30. Wii U games are at the cheapest they're ever going to be, so now's the time to buy it if you're looking for Wii or Wii U games. The GameCube has not yet really seen a huge price increase here in Japan, so I also wouldn't be super worried about waiting. If you're thinking about budgeting this, you'd be okay waiting to buy the GameCube games. Although I think those might go a little bit in price, but again, I don't see a significant amount of demand for those games. Next, Brobasar asks, do Japanese Game Boy Advance games, are they not sealed even though they are new? I am thinking to start a Game Boy Advance collection. Thank you. So I've said this like 3 times now in the video, but the Game Boy Advance is experiencing the strongest interest right now, to where game prices are absolutely just skyrocketing, to the point where you've got like $400 and $500 Game Boy Advance games. You've got there's and like the thing is some of these I don't even know what franchise there are. I think they might be based on an anime, but like Gunstar Heroes, I think if you find it in really good condition, it's like a $200 game, although you really should be paying $50 for it. The Pokemon games are really expensive, especially Emerald, as I mentioned. And the Castlevania games are, oh my God. Yeah, those can easily go, any one of them can range from $100 to $200, depending on the condition again. In general, so for the Game Boy Advance, I believe, and this is my hunch, I only have a guess about this, but in Japan, I want to say that cartridge games never came in sealed boxes. I was actually just discussing this with someone the other day, but look, in my American collecting experience, when I bought cartridge games in America, we're talking N64, Super Nintendo, Nintendo games, those always came sealed. That you had the seal, the factory seal, plastic bag or whatever, the factory seal on the outside, and then you had the box, the cardboard box. In Japan, from the games that I have seen that have been labeled as new, sometimes the used shop, they will seal it in their own plastic bag or their own plastic wrapping. But you can very clearly tell that, because it's got like Scotch tape on it. So it's very clearly not factory sealed. Some like Book Off they'll tell you it's used, but they'll do their own like vacuum sealing or whatever. I don't think I've ever found anything new or I think found things that are practically new at Hard Off / Book Off, but nothing that's been labeled as new. But I have seen, I actually remember like 5 or 6 years ago, I remember going to Super Potato and they had found a palette of one of the first N64 games released in Japan. It was a shogi. It's like Saikyo Habu Shogi. It was like a release game for the N64. They had a huge box of them. These were new N64 games, and they were just the cardboard box. There was no factory seal to them. So what I believe in principle is that anything that came as a cartridge, again, anything N64 and previous, this would also include the Game Boy Advanced and previous. I do not believe those were ever sealed. Now you can tell if someone has opened a cardboard box. I opened an N64 game, a new N64 game on this channel, and it was very clear that the second you open that flange or that hinge or whatever on the cardboard box, you can very clearly tell that there has been wear to the box and that the ink will chip off when you open it. So there are ways to tell if something has been opened or not. And I would generally trust the retailers, the used game specialists in Akihabara. When they say it's new, it's going to be new. But keep that in mind when you're buying something labeled as new, in that it is possible, it is potentially possible. I'm sure someone can find a way to open those boxes and leave no trace. And so it is therefore not sealed anymore, even though CD games, CD-based, DVD-based, Blu-ray-based games are factory sealed. They are factory wrapped in Japan, just not the cardboard box games. So just be very careful when looking for new Game Boy Advance games here in Japan. Next up, Kunishin asks, do they sell US region games in Japan, or are they all in the Japanese region / language? Now, this is a recent phenomenon. Let's talk about the before times. Basically, everything before, I want to say, like basically even including the PS3, Xbox 360, Wii U era. If you're living in Tokyo, you can go to Trader and maybe a couple of other places, and you could buy the NTSC or the European PAL region games that would have their local languages on them. But, it would be in a very small section of the store. In general, Japanese games before the modern era were only going to be available in Japanese and for the Japanese regions. But recently what's happened is when you buy like a PS4 game, and it just depends. It depends on localization schedules. It depends upon the release date. I know a lot of Switch games, PS4 and Switch games, will basically just, you pop it into your console and it will match your console's default language setting to the game, and the game will then just, all the text will be in your console's language. For example, I bought Horizon Zero Dawn when I was in America. I bought an NTSC English Horizon Zero Dawn. I put it into my Japanese PS4, which is set to Japanese, and the game just starts talking to me in Japanese. But I wanted to experience it in the original language, so I had to change my PS4's language setting to English, and then the game started playing in English. And it, back and forth between English and Japanese. Now, there are some games, like for example, Persona 4, where it's a huge RPG, so it takes a year plus, it takes an extra year past the Japanese release date to release it in America. And that means that when it ships, when you buy the Japanese version, you're only getting the Japanese. Now, if you look at Pokemon for the Switch, if you look at Sword and Shield, and even the last couple releases, those have worldwide simultaneous releases. So when you put your Japanese game into your console, it will just ask you what language you want to play it in. That's pretty exceptional, but generally from what I've experienced from sort of worldwide release games, you can at least sometimes even just choose the language from the in-game menu. It doesn't even matter what your console language is set. I believe there are a couple websites out there that keep records of all of this stuff. I'm personally not involved or know much about that. I generally just try to play Japanese games in Japanese and other games in English. But at least for anything like PS3 and beyond, it's going to be in Japanese when you're buying it in Japan. You're not going to, you will occasionally, like at Trader the other day, they had complete in-box American N64 games. If you wanted to buy a copy of Mortal Kombat 4 for $100, you could do it. I don't know why you would, but it's an option. It's possible. For the old games, you're just expect it to be in Japanese and for the Japanese region. Next, sorry about these names, guys, and I know I've read your questions before. The Cyberternatorok, asks, what games have you played on any console would you recommend for non-Japanese speakers, preferably games that are exclusive to Japan? So the big one that I can think of for whatever reason is for the N64, there is Sin and Punishment, because for one, it's in English, but also it's just a phenomenal shooter that it's a real shame it never got released outside of Japan. Other games, I like shooters are, I think, like the prime example, because you don't need to speak Japanese in order to enjoy those games, and they're so fun. The graphics are so great. Yes, they are expensive, but there's no real language barrier to there. Most action games, like, I mean, for the Sega Genesis, there are so many cool like belt scrollers. Like the final fights are fantastic. Anything exclusive to Japan. I'm trying to think like Japan exclusive games that you need to know Japanese. I mean, Custom Robo is another one that you might be able to get away with it. The story is all in Japanese, but the fighting in that is really cool. It might be difficult because you need to know like the stats of the weapons that you're equipping. So, I wouldn't recommend any RPGs. Yeah, actually, no, I don't know anything specific to Japan besides shooters that I could really recommend non-Japanese speakers to play. Yeah, I'll have to think about that and get back to you. Next, oh man, this one's gonna be a book. Monsieur Jidane asks, "Hi, first of all, Merry Christmas." Sorry for getting this to you so late, my dude. I recently discovered your channel and Kid Shoryuken, my sworn enemy. You're clearly my two favorite channels about retro game shops. I'm going for the fourth time in January. Sorry. I'm going for the fourth time to Japan in February, and I was wondering one thing. I made a map with Google Maps with some hard-offs in the suburbs of Tokyo, like Saitama, Hachioji, or Hamauda, good places to go. And I'm happy to hear that you advise precisely what I plan to do. But in my plan, I decided to go to at least 6 hard-offs, starting from Ueno to go north to Saitama, and then west to Hamauda and Hachioji. Okay, got your directions good. And finally going back to finish in Ikebukuro and at Super Potato. It's a one-day job, but is it really achievable in your opinion? I got many things to buy, many consoles and games. By the way, can we enter in another hard-off with some goods bought in another hard-off without any problem? Okay, I think I answered this question personally, just leaving a comment. I hope I did. I'll go back and check. But all right, so I'll break this down because there's like 3 different questions in here. So 1, the schedule that he mentions. So this is something you need to, so when we talk about suburban hard-offs or hard-offs that are outside of Tokyo city center, Actually, this very day, I will be going to Hachioji, which has a really good book off and hard off. It is about an hour outside of the Tokyo city center. When you're thinking about going to a hard off, you have to consider not only the time that it's going to take for you to get there via train, if you are taking the train, but also the time you're going to be spending there. So you always want to budget at least probably an hour in each hard off, especially if it's something that if you don't live here, it's either your first time or you don't get to go that often. When you go to a hard off, budget like an hour, even an hour and a half, just for going through everything. If you're price shopping, just seeing everything can take a long time, and not just the games, but the toys, the books, and everything else. You're gonna want to budget a lot of time. I personally budget an hour, and I don't really plan on ever going to more than 5 stores within a day. You're going to get tired. You got to factor in breaks. So let me break down to you. When I go out to hard offs, especially when I'm filming things, I will basically budget an hour to get there, an hour to spend there, and then 30 minutes to an hour to transfer to the next place. You also have to factor in your meals. After breakfast, you got to take time for lunch. You got to have some downtime, because you're going to be overwhelmed by the amount of things that you find and just the amount of walking. Like, especially for maybe it's me as an American who's used to driving around, although I haven't lived in America in like 9 years. If you're used to walking around, that's fine. But even just city walking, it can be really exhausting. So like the schedule that you've got here is like 6 hard-offs in a day. I know you're coming to Japan, and it's 4 times is really impressive, but I really wouldn't budget going to more than 4. I would maybe plan a 5th if you have the time, but especially if you want to do no, you can't do 6 hard offs and the Ikebukuro super potato. Just go to like 3 or 4, just take your time. And also would recommend if you're going to Hachioji, like you might as well go to the Mandarake and not go to Broadway. Like that's on the same train line. So I'm talking very specifically here to Monsieur, but otherwise pace yourself and don't overdo it because again, you want to enjoy Japan and you don't want to overextend yourself. The next question, by the way, can we enter into another hard off with some goods we bought at another hard off, at a separate hard off without any problems? In my country, you have to leave all your goods at the entrance, even if you have your receipt. In my experience, for one, maybe just, carry a bag like around with you that you can put all of your things in. You will get bags at the hard offs, but no, I've never had an issue of if you've got a bag, like a plastic bag that they give you from hard off, as long as you have your receipt, you're going to be perfectly fine. They'll understand. So yeah, no, you can take your things in with you, just exercise the normal amount of caution with that stuff and keep your receipt. Next, Fami Kid asks, by the way, one quick question about Japan. Is it legal to own an otter as a pet? I've seen some Japanese videos about otters and was curious. That is actually something I do not know. I don't know the legality about owning an otter as a pet. The problem in Japanese apartments is that generally you're not allowed to own pets. You might be able to have like a small hamster or a bird, but anything bigger than that is usually frowned upon and is something you might have to negotiate with the landlord, or you have to go and move into an apartment that specifically allows it. I'm going to assume that otters are legal. Pet ownership in Japan is something that I actually have pretty strong cultural disagreements with Japan on, just in terms of how they treat their animals. But also, I don't think the law is going to be that stringent. But I can't tell you from personal experience. I've never seen an otter as a pet in Japan. Next, Gamer Meoj asks, is it cheaper to buy from stores that are far away from Tokyo? Like, should I just buy games in Tokyo or plan a trip to a small town and buy games there? I would say 9 times out of 10, yes, I've been to some shops in the middle of nowhere, Japan that have had worse prices than central Tokyo. Those places do exist. But yeah, actually, what I would say just in general, if you are visiting Japan, you should get out of Tokyo. There are lots of cool towns, even just close by to Tokyo, that you could visit. You could go to Kamakura, that's like an hour south of Tokyo, that's got a couple great hard offs, but also just the cultural artifacts there and the cultural sites there are so cool. It's got these amazing beaches that you should go to these places, not only for the video games, but also for just experiencing another side of Japan. So absolutely, if you haven't been to Japan before and you're coming to Tokyo, I would highly recommend getting out of the city, not just for cheap video games, but also just to enjoy Japan. James V asks, thank you for these videos. It inspired me to book my trip to Tokyo in April, and you've helped me kind of price out some things I'm dying to get: Neo Geo, PC Engine, and Nintendo systems. Well, good luck, because that's the most expensive. Is the market for Neo Geo games big at hard off? So I have actually just recently, much to a certain person's chagrin, thought about getting into Neo Geo collecting. Nothing super expensive. So I've actually been pricing out Neo Geo games and looking at their availability. The average hard off might have 1 or 2 common Neo Geo games. You're not going to find rare games for the Neo Geo at hard off. You might find the occasional piece of hardware. I once found a Neo Geo in the junk section, meaning that it was perfectly fine, but for some reason they didn't see it as sellable for much cheaper than you would find it at a specialty store. But if you're but if you're looking for Neo Geo games, you've got to look in central Tokyo. You've got to go to Akihabara. God, Jesus, I'm sorry. When you're looking for Neo Geo games, go to Trader. They generally have the best prices. If you're looking for stuff in amazing, immaculate condition and you're looking for rarity, go to Mandarake, but you will pay. I think I saw I can't remember the full name of it, but it was like Dragon Rising or like Dragon Star Rising. It was $5,000 at Super Potato, and then it was like 3,000 at Trader. So the thing to keep in mind for Neo Geo collecting in Japan is this is something you will really want to shop around on, because again, it can mean a $2,000 difference on a very rare game. And for even the cheap ones, it could mean going to Hard Off and finding a copy of King of Fighters 94 for like $40 at Hard Off, or you find it at Mandarake for $80. But it could also be in better condition. It could the inserts could not have any creases in them, and that ups the price by $20 or $30. Or if you don't care that much and you're okay with having like a little tiny imperceptible scratch on the box of the game, you could save $40 that way. So that's just my tips for Neo Geo collecting using my very limited knowledge. ... It's two full width Japanese periods, asks, great to see a focus on GBA. Do you expect the DS and 3DS scene in Japan to pick up in the next 5 years? Yes. I think for the DS has already gotten some $100 plus games. Like I think there's a couple of shooters for the DS that have really exploded in value in the last year or two. We're sort of hitting that point because I can't remember when the DS actually came out, but I think it's at that sweet spot where the people who had the DS when they were kids are now getting older and they can now afford to spend some money. So yes, the DS, I think for super rare games that received low print runs, for example, like Metal Slug 7, is like, man, it's like a $200, $300 game now, especially for like the special edition. I think I saw one like the other day for like $300, $400. But in general, I don't see the DS or the 3DS for most of the games, like, the Mario games, the Nintendo games. These received massive print runs, and although it's a unique scenario because these aren't going to get re-releases because of you needed the dual screens for them to work, and the 3DS, even if you didn't use the 3D, that's a component plus the dual screens. So some of these games are going to be locked on these systems. So I'm very interested to see what happens with these games, simply because you can't find them on other systems. But they also did receive massive print runs. So I think you'll probably see the prices increase a little bit, but nowhere near what happened to the Famicom or the Super Famicom. That's kind of my guess. And the portable market is also very unique because Nintendo has almost always dominated it. The PSP and the Vita did do okay in Japan, but just by and large, the DS and the 3DS that was the Japanese portable market. So that means there's not going to be a split interest. It's going to be very monolithic, meaning the prices will go up in the next couple years, but I don't think it's anything to worry about. Again, if you're budgeting for something like this, you can wait. I think it's something you can wait on, except for like the hyper rare titles. Dylan asks, can these Pokemon or Advanced War games be played in English? I can't remember if any GBA games had the ability to change the language. Thanks. I'm just going to say a blanket no. In my experience, while the Game Boy Advance is region-free, meaning you can take English games, you can take NTSC American games and put them into a Japanese console and they will work, and vice versa. No, I've never seen a Game Boy Advance game where you can choose the language. I mean, maybe one exists, but I'm gonna bet and say no. I don't think those exist. Kaneda 2002 asks, great video, what about Neo Geo Pocket games or the Sega Mark series? So I don't know about the Sega Mark, Sega Mark 1, 2, and 3. I know you can find those games. You can even find them at Hard Offs in the Tokyo area, and you can definitely find them at the used shops in Akihabara. They're going to be semi-expensive, like $30 for like a common game. I don't know that much about that market, so I won't comment on it. I can talk about the Neo Geo Pocket though, where you've just had some of the strangest games really go up in price. Like of course, Metal Slug is going to be Metal Slug, the first mission or the first two missions, those two separate games. Those are like $100 a piece. I can understand that. But then you've got like Gal's Fighter, which is one of the few games that I ever bought cheap and ever got expensive. I think I bought it for like $30 or $40. It's now a $150 game. Yeah, the Neo Geo Pocket Color is really experiencing some weird price shifts to where the rare games are really expensive, but it's also one of those things where you can also find some cheap-ish games for the system. I know there's some Sonic games. There might even be some Mega Man games for it. I can't remember, for the Neo Geo Pocket that have also become like $100 or nearish $100 depending on where you're buying it. So that market, I can't comment that much on it other than what I see in the showcase in Akihabara. Last question for the video. Lord English asks, "Hey jcontra, I was looking to pick up some Famitsu magazines, but prices on eBay are insane. My question to you is, are the prices of old game magazines reasonable in Japan, or do they really sell for $30 plus for one back issue, not including shipping?" Okay, so a few years ago, I had this grand design where I was going to buy old Famitsu magazines and scan them for archival purposes. But I ended up not doing it because I just didn't really have that much of an interest in it. It was going to be really expensive and it was going to take a lot of time. Although I hope I still have those. But it's really cool to look at old Japanese magazines because the art is unique. It has inside stories on things that you might not be able to find in the American or the English magazines. Now, in my experience, prices can vary. I can talk about Famitsu and like Famimaga. The prices I've seen, I don't know what it's like today, but when I was looking at these 3 or 4 years ago, it was about $10 per magazine. Sometimes it went up to $20. The only place I've ever seen these are at Mandarake. Mandarake, in Akihabara, as well as the one in Fukuoka, have pretty extensive old Japanese magazine like availability. So we're talking Famitsu, like Sega Saturn magazines, Sega Dreamcast magazines, like pretty much every console had its own specialist magazine. And those can range depending on the age. Like if we're talking about anything released in the last 20 years, those can be like $2, $3. If we're talking about old stuff, especially old Famitsus, remember these things came out like once a week, and like buying a $10 magazine, even if it's only $10, sometimes it can be $20. You're going to be buying a lot of these magazines. But yes, they are much cheaper in the country. So in this case, Lord English, if you come to Japan, you're going to find these game magazines much, much cheaper than what you'll find on eBay. Actually, I'm going to be going to Mandarake today, so maybe I can speak about this in the future in terms of game magazines. I want to say they're still a lot cheaper compared to what you'll find on eBay. So on that note, I'm going to end it here. I still have a whole backlog of questions that I want to get to. Again, comment on this video, or not again, it's the first time I'm mentioning it. Please leave me a question. I'll try and get to it in the next video or in a future video. You can put it on this video right now, or you can put it on any video. I do read the questions, and even if I can't individually respond to your question, I will in a video. So with that, I've been your man in Japan, jcontra, saying thanks for watching, see you next time, and mahalo.